The phone rang at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. I remember the exact time because I was watching my neighbor's cat through the kitchen window, and the afternoon light was just starting to fade. When I picked up, my daughter-in-law Jessica's voice came through the speaker with that particular tone she used when she'd already made up her mind about something. "Margaret, we need to talk about Christmas," she said, not even bothering with a proper greeting. No, "Hello, how are you?" or "Hope you're doing well." Just straight to business, like I was some vendor she needed to cancel services with. I set down my coffee mug and waited. In the background, I could hear my granddaughter Emma's voice asking something about homework and the television playing some cartoon. Normal family sounds that I wouldn't be part of this year, apparently. "The thing is," Jessica continued, "we've been talking, and we're going to have to make Christmas dinner smaller this year. You know how tight the dining room gets. And with Jessica's parents coming from Portland, and her sister bringing the twins, there's just no room at the table for everyone." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. No room at the table? Right. So we were thinking maybe you could just send a card this year? Something nice, with a photo or whatever. The kids always like getting mail. Send a card. To my own son's house. To see my own grandchildren on Christmas. I'd been hosting Christmas dinner for 32 years. In my house, at my table, with my china and my mother's silver. When David was little, I'd get up at 5 in the morning to start the turkey. I'd make 3 different kinds of pie because he couldn't choose just one. I'd set the table with cloth napkins and candles, and we'd take photos by the tree afterward. But 3 years ago, Jessica decided my house was too far from their place. Too much trouble for the kids to travel 20 minutes across town. So Christmas moved to their modern suburban home with the granite countertops and the open floor plan. I adapted. I brought dishes to contribute and helped with cleanup. I bought gifts for everyone and played board games with Emma and little Michael until they got tired and cranky. Now I wasn't even invited to that. "Margaret? You still there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here." "Great. So you'll send a card then? Maybe something with a nice winter scene?" That's when it hit me fully. They weren't asking. They were telling. This wasn't a discussion or a request for understanding. This was a notification that I'd been removed from the family Christmas, like a dish that no longer fit the menu. I thought about all the birthday parties I'd attended in their backyard, all the school plays I'd driven across town to watch, all the emergency babysitting when Jessica's work ran late. I thought about the check I'd written when they needed help with the down payment on that house, the same house that apparently didn't have room for me at Christmas. "A winter scene," I repeated. "Exactly. The kids love getting cards in the mail. It's actually better this way, more special. More special than being there, than hugging my grandchildren on Christmas morning, than seeing their faces when they opened the presents I'd spent weeks choosing." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The truth is, I should have seen this coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years, but I'd chosen to ignore them or make excuses. That's what you do when you love people. You give them the benefit of the doubt long after they've stopped deserving it. It started small. Jessica would forget to invite me to Emma's soccer games, then act surprised when I mentioned not knowing about them. "Oh, I thought David told you," she'd say. But David worked 60-hour weeks and barely remembered to call me on Sundays, let alone relay information about weekend activities. Then there were the family photos. They'd post pictures from restaurants and events on social media, and I'd wonder why I hadn't been included. When I asked, Jessica would say it was last minute or just immediate family. But her sister lived 2 hours away and somehow always managed to make these spontaneous gatherings. The final straw before the Christmas call had been Emma's 13th birthday party in September. I'd bought her a beautiful jewelry box, had it engraved with her initials, and wrapped it carefully with a card I'd written by hand. When I arrived at their house, carrying the gift and a homemade chocolate cake, Emma's favourite, Jessica met me at the door. "Oh, Margaret, didn't David tell you?" We moved the party to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids wanted something more fun than a home party. I stood there in my good dress, holding a homemade cake, while through the window I could see Jessica's mother setting up decorations in the backyard. The party hadn't moved. I just hadn't been included in the real celebration. "But I made Emma's cake," I said. "That's so sweet. But we already ordered pizza and cake from the restaurant. You understand, right? It's what Emma wanted." Emma appeared behind her mother, wearing a new dress I'd never seen, and a smile that faltered when she saw me standing on the doorstep like a stranger. "Grandma Maggie, Mum said you couldn't come because you were busy." Jessica's face went red. "I meant you couldn't come to Chuck E. Cheese because it's too loud and crowded for you." Too loud and crowded for me. Like I was some fragile elderly woman who couldn't handle a children's birthday party. I was 63 years old and in perfect health. I'd raised 2 children, worked as a school principal for 30 years, and had travelled to 4 continents. But apparently, I was too delicate for pizza and arcade games. I gave Emma her present and left the cake with Jessica, who accepted it with the kind of smile you give to a well-meaning neighbour you don't want to hurt. As I drove home, I realised I'd been demoted from family member to obligation. I was someone they felt they had to include out of duty, not someone they actually wanted around. The Christmas phone call was just the final confirmation of what I already knew, but hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been quietly pushed out of my own family. After Jessica hung up that day in November, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at the wall calendar where I'd already marked December 25th with a red star. For 35 years, Christmas had been my holiday. I'd hosted it, planned it, cooked for it, and made it magical for everyone else. Now I was being asked to participate from a distance, like a pen pal. I called David that evening after I knew he'd be home from work. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Mum, what's up?" "Jessica called me today about Christmas." There was a pause, and I could hear him moving around, probably putting away his laptop or loosening his tie. "Yeah, about that. I meant to call you. It's going to be tight this year with all the family coming." "Your family?" I said. "Well, Jessica's family too. Her parents are flying in from Portland, and her sister's bringing the twins. You know how small our dining room is." I'd been in that dining room dozens of times. It seated 8 people comfortably, 10 if you brought in chairs from the kitchen. Jessica's parents, her sister's husband, the twins, David, Jessica, Emma, and Michael. That was 9 people. There was absolutely room for one more. "What about the kids' Christmas morning?" I asked. "I always come over to watch them open presents." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mum, the thing is, we're trying to create new traditions. You know, with Jessica's family here, we want to make it special for them. They don't get to see the kids very often." New traditions. As if 35 years of old traditions meant nothing. As if my presence somehow made things less special for Jessica's family rather than more complete. "I see," I said, though I didn't see at all. "So I should just send a card." "A card would be great. The kids love getting mail." "The kids love getting mail. Not, the kids would love to see you. Or, we wish we could figure out a way to make it work." The kids love getting mail, like I was some distant relative they barely knew. That night, I pulled out my photo albums and looked through decades of Christmas pictures. There I was, year after year, in the center of every family gathering, holding baby David by his first Christmas tree, teaching Emma how to make sugar cookies, reading The Night Before Christmas to Michael last year while he sat on my lap in his pajamas. In every photo, I was surrounded by family, surrounded by love, surrounded by the life I'd built and nurtured and sacrificed for. Now I was being cropped out of the picture entirely. I decided to give David one more chance. Maybe Jessica had pressured him into this decision, and if I talked to him privately, he'd realize how hurtful it was and find a way to include me. I drove to his office the next day during his lunch hour. He seemed surprised to see me, checking his watch as I sat down across from his desk. "Mum, is everything okay? You didn't need to come all the way down here. I wanted to talk to you about Christmas without Jessica listening in." His expression tightened. "Mum, we've already made the decision. I know it's disappointing, but it's just 1 year. Maybe next year we can figure something out." "Next year? David, I'm 63 years old. How many Christmases do you think I have left?" "Don't be dramatic. You're in great health. You'll probably outlive all of us." Dramatic? My own son was calling me dramatic for wanting to spend Christmas with my family. "When you were little," I said, "and your father left, I worked 2 jobs to keep our house, so your Christmas mornings would be special. I never missed a single school play or baseball game. I drove you to college and helped you move into your dorm room and cried in the car afterward because I was so proud and so sad to see you go. I was there when Emma was born, and Michael too. I held your hand in the hospital waiting room when Jessica had complications. I know, Mom, and I appreciate everything you've done." Appreciate. Past tense. Like my motherhood was something that had ended, a service I'd provided that was no longer needed. "I'm not asking for appreciation," I said. "I'm asking to be included in my own family's Christmas." David looked at his computer screen, then back at me. "Mum, the truth is, Jessica feels like you're too involved sometimes. Like you're always trying to take over or make suggestions about how we should do things. She just wants this Christmas to be peaceful." Too involved. In my own son's life. In my own grandchildren's lives. I left his office that day knowing that the conversation was over. Jessica had made her decision, David had supported it, and I had been voted out. There would be no appeal, no compromise, no room at the table. That evening, I made my own decision. I spent the next few days thinking about what Jessica had said. Just send a card. Something nice, with a winter scene. She'd been so specific about it, so dismissive, like sending a card was some consolation prize that would make up for being excluded from the most important family day of the year. Fine. I'd send a card, but it would be exactly the card I wanted to send. See, there was something Jessica didn't know about me, something David had forgotten in his hurry to build his new life with his new priorities. Before I became a school principal, before I became a mother, before I became the family Christmas coordinator, I had been someone else entirely. In my 20s, before I met David's father, I had saved up enough money to spend 6 months traveling through Europe. I'd worked 3 jobs, lived in a studio apartment, and eaten nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for a year to afford that trip. It had been the adventure of my lifetime, sleeping in hostels, taking trains to places I'd only seen in books, meeting people from all over the world. One of the places I'd visited was a small coastal town in Italy called Portofino. I'd only stayed 2 days, but it had been magical. Pastel houses climbing up from a perfect little harbour, boats bobbing in water so blue it looked artificial, restaurants where you could sit outside and eat fresh seafood while watching the sunset paint everything golden. I'd taken dozens of photos, but this was long before digital cameras, so the film had been expensive to develop. I'd kept the pictures in an album for 40 years, occasionally pulling them out to remember what it felt like to be young and free and answerable to no one but myself. Jessica had seen those photos once, about 5 years ago, when she was looking through my bookshelf for something to read. She'd paused on the album and flipped through it with the kind of hunger I recognized, the longing of someone who'd never been anywhere exotic, never done anything spontaneous, never had adventures. "Oh my God, Margaret," she'd said. "These are incredible. Where is this place?" I'd told her about Portofino, about the little hotel where I'd stayed, about the restaurant where I'd eaten alone and felt perfectly content to do so. She'd listened with the kind of attention she usually reserved for her phone. "David and I have always talked about going to Italy," she'd said, lingering over a photo of me sitting at a cafe table with the harbour behind me. "Someday, when we can afford it, when the kids are older, this looks like paradise." Someday. That's what people always say when they're not brave enough to make things happen now. But I was brave enough. I had been once, and I could be again. I opened my laptop and started researching flights to Italy. It had been 40 years since I'd been to Portofino, but the internet showed me that it was still there, still beautiful, still the kind of place that made people stop scrolling through photos and sigh with longing. The flights were expensive, especially for December travel. The hotels were even more expensive. I'd be spending a significant chunk of my savings, money I'd been keeping for emergencies, or maybe to help the grandchildren with college someday. But what was the point of saving money for grandchildren who were being taught that I wasn't important enough to include in their lives? What was the point of emergency funds when I was living the emergency right now, the emergency of being forgotten by my own family? I booked the flight. I booked the hotel. I booked a table at the same restaurant where I'd eaten alone 40 years ago, where I would eat alone again, but this time by choice rather than circumstance. And then I started planning my Christmas card. I left for Italy on December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. I didn't tell David or Jessica where I was going. I didn't tell anyone except my neighbour, who agreed to collect my mail and check on the house. I wanted the trip to be exactly what it was, a gift to myself, a reminder of who I'd been before I became someone whose value was measured entirely by what I could provide to other people. The flight was long, but not unpleasant. I'd upgraded to business class, another extravagance I'd never allowed myself when I was being financially responsible for other people's futures. I read a book, drank wine, and slept better than I had in months. When I landed in Nice and took the train along the coast to Italy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement. Pure, uncomplicated excitement about what was ahead instead of worry about what I was leaving behind. Portofino looked exactly as I remembered, and completely different at the same time. The pastel houses were still there, climbing up from the harbour like they were reaching toward the sky. The water was still impossibly blue. The restaurants still had outdoor seating where you could watch boats rock gently in the harbour while you ate. But I saw it all through different eyes now. 40 years ago, I'd been a young woman on an adventure, slightly nervous about travelling alone, constantly aware that I was doing something unusual and brave. Now I was a 63-year-old woman on a different kind of adventure, completely comfortable with my own company, aware that what I was doing was still unusual, but no longer caring whether anyone else thought it was brave. I checked into the same hotel where I'd stayed decades earlier. It had been renovated and modernized, but my room had a balcony overlooking the harbour, and I spent my first evening there with a glass of Prosecco, watching the sunset turn everything golden, just like I remembered. The next morning, I walked through the town with my camera, a much better camera than I'd had 40 years ago. I took pictures of everything: the harbour, the houses, the narrow streets, the shops selling postcards and souvenirs. I ate lunch at a cafe overlooking the water and took a selfie with the view behind me. This was the photo that would go on my Christmas card. In the picture, I'm sitting at a small table with a glass of wine and a plate of seafood pasta. I'm wearing a red sweater, Christmas colours, very festive, and sunglasses. And I'm smiling the kind of smile you can only have when you're exactly where you want to be. Behind me, the harbour stretches out in perfect blue, dotted with expensive yachts and fishing boats, the pastel houses rising up the hillside like something from a movie. I look happy. I look free. I look like someone having the time of her life in one of the most beautiful places on earth. I look like someone who definitely doesn't need anyone's pity or charity invitations. That evening, I went to the same restaurant where I'd eaten alone 40 years ago. The menu had changed. The prices had certainly changed, but the view was exactly the same. I ordered champagne, not Prosecco, champagne, and toasted myself for having the courage to come back. At the table next to me, an American couple was taking photos of their food and giggling about posting them on social media to make their friends jealous. The woman looked about Jessica's age, and she kept saying things like, "Oh my God, this is so much better than Christmas at home," and "I can't believe we're actually here." I wanted to lean over and tell her that being there was a choice, not a miracle. That anyone could be there if they were willing to prioritize their own happiness over other people's expectations. But I didn't. I just smiled and took another sip of champagne and appreciated the fact that I was there at that moment, choosing joy over obligation. I stayed in Portofino for 4 days. I took dozens of photos, ate incredible food, bought myself things I didn't need just because I wanted them, and had conversations with strangers in a mixture of English and terrible Italian. I felt like myself in a way I hadn't in years. Not David's mother, not Emma and Michael's grandmother, not the woman who was too involved or too old or too inconvenient. Just Margaret. Just me. On Christmas morning, I woke up in my hotel room and opened the balcony doors to let in the Mediterranean air. I could hear church bells ringing somewhere in the distance and boats moving in the harbour below. I made coffee with the little machine in my room and sat on the balcony in my pyjamas, watching the world wake up. It was the most peaceful Christmas morning I'd had in decades. I came home from Italy on December 28th, relaxed and slightly tanned, and completely satisfied with my decision. My neighbour had collected a stack of Christmas cards from my mailbox. Cards from old friends, former colleagues, distant relatives who still remembered to include me in their holiday traditions. There was nothing from David's house. No card from the grandchildren, no family photo, no acknowledgement that Christmas had happened at all. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. I'd been completely written out of their holiday, just as they'd planned. But I had a card to send to them. I'd picked it out in one of the shops in Portofino. A beautiful card with a winter scene on the front, exactly what Jessica had requested. Snow-covered mountains in the distance, a frozen lake, pine trees dusted with white. Very traditional, very appropriate for Christmas. Inside, I'd had them print my favourite photo from the trip. Me at the cafe table, smiling with the harbour behind me, looking like I was having the most wonderful time in the world. Under the photo, I wrote, "Greetings from Portofino, having the most amazing Christmas vacation. Thank you for encouraging me to make new traditions. Love, Margaret." I mailed it on December 30th, along with small gifts I'd bought for Emma and Michael in Italy, a silk scarf for Emma and a leather journal for Michael. Nothing expensive or elaborate, just thoughtful presents from someone who'd been thinking of them even while they weren't thinking of her. Then I waited. David called on January 2nd. He sounded confused and slightly panicked. "Mum, we got your card. Did you really go to Italy?" "I did. It was wonderful." "But when? How long were you there?" "I left on December 20th and came back on the 28th. I spent Christmas in Portofino. There was a long pause. You spent Christmas alone in Italy? I spent Christmas exactly where I wanted to be. Another pause. Mum, we had no idea you were even travelling. What if something had happened? What if there had been an emergency? What kind of emergency? I don't know. Anything. We wouldn't have known how to reach you. This was interesting. For the first time in months, David sounded genuinely concerned about me, genuinely worried about my well-being. All it had taken was for me to disappear without asking permission or explaining my plans. I'm fine, I said. I had a lovely trip. The weather was perfect, the food was incredible, and I met some very nice people. But Mom, you've never travelled alone like that. Weren't you scared? David, I travelled alone through Europe for 6 months when I was 25. I think I can handle a few days in Italy at 63. I could hear him talking to Jessica in the background, her voice getting higher and more agitated as she processed what had happened. Jessica wants to know why you didn't tell us you were going. You didn't invite me to your Christmas, so I made my own plans. I thought you'd be happy that I took your advice about starting new traditions. More background conversation. Jessica's voice was definitely agitated now. She says the card was passive-aggressive. The card was exactly what she asked for. A nice winter scene with a photo. I followed her instructions perfectly. David sighed. Mum, can we talk about this in person? Can you come over for dinner this weekend? Am I invited, or are you just checking if I'm available to babysit? You're invited, please. We need to talk. I agreed to come over that Saturday, curious to see what they had to say, now that I'd proven I didn't need their approval to have a good time. When I arrived at David's house that Saturday, Jessica met me at the door with the same forced smile she'd worn when I brought Emma's birthday cake. But there was something different in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Margaret, come in. How was your flight back? Fine, thank you. A little crowded, but that's January travel. The kids ran to greet me, excited about the gifts I'd brought them from Italy. Emma immediately put on the silk scarf and posed for selfies, while Michael opened the leather journal and started drawing in it right away. Their enthusiasm was genuine and uncomplicated, and it reminded me why I'd bought the gifts in the first place. Grandma Maggie, did you really eat pasta every day? Emma asked. Almost every day. And gelato. Lots of gelato. I want to go to Italy, Michael announced. It looks awesome. Jessica cleared her throat. Kids, go play upstairs for a while. The adults need to talk. Once we were alone in the living room, the atmosphere changed completely. David sat forward in his chair, looking uncomfortable, while Jessica perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to flee at any moment. Mum, David started, we owe you an apology. For what? For Christmas. For not including you. We handled it badly. I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to be struggling with what to say next. Jessica jumped in. We just thought it would be easier with all my family here, you know? Less complicated. But we realize now that we hurt your feelings, and we're sorry. Less complicated. That was one way to put it. I wasn't hurt, I said. I was disappointed. There's a difference. Well, yes, disappointed then. We're sorry you were disappointed. Are you sorry I was disappointed? Or are you sorry that I went to Italy instead of sitting home alone feeling sorry for myself? Jessica's face flushed. That's not... We didn't expect you to leave the country. What did you expect me to do? I don't know. Stay home, maybe have a quiet day, send the card like we talked about. I did send a card, with a photo, just like you suggested. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Now we were getting to the truth. Jessica was angry that I'd had the audacity to enjoy myself instead of being miserable. She was angry that I'd gone somewhere she'd always wanted to go, done something she'd always wanted to do, and had a better Christmas than she did. "How was your Christmas?" I asked. "Did Jessica's family enjoy themselves?" David and Jessica exchanged a look. "It was fine," David said. "A little chaotic with all the kids, but fine." "The twins broke Emma's new telescope," Jessica added, sounding annoyed. "And my father made some comments about the house that were pretty rude." "I'm sorry to hear that." "And my mother kept asking where you were," Jessica continued. "She kept saying how strange it was that David's mother wasn't there for Christmas. It was awkward." Ah, there it was. Jessica's family had noticed my absence and questioned it, making Jessica uncomfortable. She'd had to explain why she'd excluded her mother-in-law from Christmas, and apparently the explanation hadn't gone over well. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them you were busy with your own plans." Which was true. "But I didn't know you were in Italy." Jessica's voice was getting higher. "I thought you were just staying home. If people ask where you were, what am I supposed to say?" "You could say I was in Italy, having a wonderful time. That's also true." David leaned forward. "Mum, the thing is, we're worried about you. This isn't like you. You don't just take off for foreign countries without telling anyone. How do you know what's like me? When was the last time you asked me about my interests, my goals, my dreams? When was the last time either of you had a conversation with me about anything other than babysitting schedules and family logistics?" They both looked stunned, like it had never occurred to them that I might have thoughts and feelings beyond my role as their convenient helper. "We ask about you all the time," Jessica protested. "You ask how I'm doing, which isn't the same thing. You ask if I'm available to babysit, or if I can bring a side dish to dinner. But you don't ask what I want, or what would make me happy, or what I'm interested in doing with my life." "Well, what do you want?" David asked, like he was calling my bluff. "I want to travel more. I want to take art classes. I want to learn Italian properly so I can go back to Italy and actually have real conversations with people. I want to be included in my family's important moments, not because you need something from me, but because you genuinely want me there." They sat quietly for a moment, processing this information like it was completely foreign to them. "We do want you there," David said finally. "Do you? Or do you want the version of me that shows up when you need something and disappears when you don't?" Jessica stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to apologize, and you're turning it into some kind of attack on our character." "I'm not attacking your character. I'm explaining mine. By running off to Italy like some kind of rebellious teenager? By making choices that prioritize my own happiness for once." Jessica looked at David, clearly expecting him to support her, but he was staring at the floor. After a moment, he looked up at me. "Mum, what do you want from us going forward?" It was a good question, a fair question, and I'd been thinking about it since I'd booked my flight to Italy. "I want to be included because you want me there, not because you feel obligated. I want you to ask about my life and actually listen to the answer. I want you to remember that I'm a person with my own interests and dreams, not just a grandmother and babysitter." "And if we do that," Jessica asked, "then I'll be happy to be part of your lives. But I won't be taken for granted anymore, and I won't be anyone's backup plan." We talked for another hour, working through logistics and expectations and boundaries. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Jessica seemed ready to storm out of her own living room, but we made progress. By the time I left, we'd agreed on some new ground rules. I would be invited to family events because they wanted me there, not because I was expected to be there. They would include me in planning and decision-making, not just inform me of decisions after they'd been made. And I would communicate my own plans and interests instead of assuming they weren't important enough to mention. It's been 6 months since my Christmas in Italy, and things have changed in ways I didn't expect. Some changes were immediate, some took time, and some are still evolving. The most obvious change is that I'm traveling more. I spent a week in Ireland in March, taking a photography workshop. In May, I went to New Mexico to visit an old friend from college who'd been inviting me for years. Next month, I'm going back to Italy, this time to Tuscany for a cooking class. Each trip, I send postcards to Emma and Michael, telling them about the places I'm seeing and the things I'm learning. Emma has started a collection of them on her bulletin board, and Michael asks me to bring him something small from each place: a keychain, a magnet, a coin. They think their grandmother is adventurous and interesting, which is how I want them to think of me. David and Jessica's attitude toward my travels has evolved too. At first, they seemed worried and slightly disapproving, like I was going through some kind of late-life crisis. But as they've seen how happy and energized I am when I return from trips, they've become more supportive. Jessica even asked me for advice when she was planning their family vacation to Hawaii, wanting to know about travel apps and packing tips. The bigger change is in our day-to-day relationship. They include me in more decisions now, ask my opinion on things that matter to them, remember to invite me to things that aren't major holidays. I babysit less frequently, but when I do, it's because they've asked nicely, and I've chosen to say yes, not because it's assumed I'll be available. Jessica and I will probably never be close friends, but we've reached a kind of respectful détente. She's stopped treating me like an intrusive mother-in-law who needs to be managed, and I've stopped expecting her to fill the role of the daughter-in-law I might have wanted. We're polite, we're civil, and occasionally we even enjoy each other's company. The most surprising change is that I've made new friends. The photography workshop in Ireland connected me with a group of women my age who love to travel, and we've started planning trips together. I joined an Italian conversation group at the community centre and discovered that several of the members are also interested in travel and culture. I'm building a social life that doesn't revolve entirely around my family, which makes me less dependent on their approval and attention. But the most important change is internal. I remember who I was before I became defined entirely by my relationships to other people. I'm still a mother and grandmother, but I'm also Margaret, someone with interests, goals, and adventures of her own. The Christmas card photo is still on my refrigerator, next to more recent photos from my travels. Sometimes when I'm making coffee in the morning, I look at that picture of myself sitting in the Italian cafe, smiling at the camera with the harbour behind me, and I remember what it felt like to be exactly where I wanted to be. That feeling of choosing joy over obligation, of prioritizing my own happiness, of being brave enough to do something just because I wanted to. That's what I want to remember. Not the hurt of being excluded, not the anger of being taken for granted, but the moment when I decided to stop waiting for other people to make me happy and started doing it myself. This Christmas, I'll be included in the family celebration. David has already confirmed the date and asked what I'd like to contribute to the dinner. But I've also made backup plans. A Christmas market tour in Germany that I can book if the family plans fall through. Because I learned something important in Portofino. Happiness is not something you wait for other people to give you. It's something you create for yourself, one choice at a time. And sometimes the best Christmas card you can send is a photo of yourself living your best life, with or without anyone else's permission.